She was on her knees in the middle of a grocery store aisle when it happened. Not because she fell, not because she was sick, because the card declined. Again. And the cashier, a young girl barely 20, sighed loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Ma'am, do you have another card?" Angela Okonkwo was 60 years old. She had buried a husband, raised 3 children, survived a civil war in her home country of Nigeria, and crossed an ocean with nothing but 2 suitcases and a prayer. She had never, not once in 6 decades of living, felt small. Until that moment. Her hands were shaking as she put the groceries back one by one. The rice, the eggs. She kept the bread and the sardines. That would be enough. That had to be enough. Nobody helped her. Nobody said a word. She walked out of that store in Seoul, South Korea, a city she had moved to 3 years ago to be closer to her youngest daughter, and she stood on the pavement in the cold November air, and she did something she hadn't done since the night they told her Emmanuel was gone. She cried. Not loudly. Angela didn't cry loudly. She cried the way women who have survived too much learn to cry. Quietly, with her chin up, her eyes wet, and her chest absolutely breaking. That was the first time Kang Jun-ho saw her. He was sitting in the back of a black car that cost more than most people's apartments. The window was cracked slightly. He had a habit of doing that, needing just a thread of outside air even in winter. And he saw her the moment his driver turned onto that street. He almost looked away. Almost. But something about the way she stood, dignified even in her pain, like a queen who refused to fall even when everything inside her already had, made him tell his driver to stop. "Wait here." His bodyguard stirred. "Sir, I said wait." Kang Jun-ho was 57 years old. He was the kind of man whose name people said quietly in Seoul. Not because he was famous. Famous was for actors and singers. Jun-ho was something else. The kind of powerful that operated in shadows, in rooms where decisions got made before the public ever heard about them. He ran the Kang Group legally, yes. But below that, layered deep like the roots of an old tree, was something older and darker that he had inherited from his father and was still, quietly, trying to dismantle. He was not a good man in the way people meant when they called someone good. But he was precise, he was fair, and he had a radar for genuine pain. Probably because he had spent 57 years hiding his own. He got out of the car. Angela heard footsteps and turned, expecting nothing, and found a tall Korean man in a charcoal coat standing a few feet away, holding a handkerchief out toward her like it was the most normal thing in the world. She blinked. "You don't need to be embarrassed," he said. His English was careful, deliberate, accented but clear. "It's cold. Your eyes are watering." She almost laughed. It was such an absurd, kind lie. She took the handkerchief. "Thank you," she said, because Angela Okonkwo had been raised to say thank you even when she wanted to say something else. He nodded once, and then, and this was the part she would think about later, again and again, he didn't leave. He just stood there beside her, looking at the street, as if he had nowhere important to be. After a moment, he said, "Have you eaten?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him properly for the first time. Dark eyes, sharp face, the kind of silver threading through his hair that only came from carrying serious weight for serious years. He wasn't handsome in a soft way. He was handsome in the way old buildings are handsome, structured, permanent, a little severe. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. But you're cold, and it's almost 6 o'clock, and there's a restaurant 1 block from here that makes the best sundubu jjigae in this district. He paused. You can say no. She should have said no. She said yes. They sat across from each other in a small restaurant with steamed-up windows and low lighting. The soup arrived quickly. Rich, red, soft tofu floating in a broth that smelled like warmth itself. Angela hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful hit her tongue and she had to close her eyes for a second. When she opened them, he was watching her. Not the way men usually watched women, possessively or with that particular hunger she had learned to recognize and avoid. He was watching her the way you watch something you're trying to understand. What's your name? She asked. Jun-ho. Kan Jun-ho. Something shifted in his expression when he said it, a slight tightening, like he was waiting to see if she recognized the name. She didn't. She was Igbo, from Anambra State, and had been in Seoul for 3 years, mostly inside her daughter's apartment. She knew very little about the world he moved in. Angela, she said. Angela Okonkwo. What does it mean? She was surprised by the question. Most people didn't ask. Daughter of a king, she said simply. He nodded slowly. Like that made complete sense to him. They talked for 2 hours. She told him about Emmanuel, carefully at first, then less carefully, because there was something about this man's silence that made speaking feel safe. Emmanuel, who had been an engineer. Emmanuel, who sang in the shower and cried at football matches and died of a heart attack at 62, just before they were supposed to retire together and travel. Emmanuel, who had been the only man she ever loved and the only man she ever planned to. Jun-ho listened to all of it without interrupting once. When she finished, the restaurant had emptied around them. The young waiter was hovering uncertainly near the kitchen. You loved him completely, Jun-ho said. Not a question. Yes. Then you know what it is, he said quietly. To have something real. Something in his voice made her look at him carefully. You've lost someone too. He looked down at his tea. A long time ago. A pause. My wife. 15 years. The word settled between them. Not heavily, just honestly. I'm sorry, Angela said. She was kind, he said. The kindest person in my world. His jaw moved slightly. My world was not always a kind place. He called her the next day. She almost didn't answer. She almost told her daughter Chisum, who would have panicked and launched into a full investigation of Kang Jun-ho that would have taken 3 hours and ended with warnings. She almost convinced herself it was nothing, an old man being courteous, nothing more. But she answered. And then she answered the day after that. Within 2 weeks it had become a thing. Not a romance, not yet, not anything she could put a name to, just him calling in the evenings and her sitting by the window of Chisum's small apartment and the two of them talking. About food, about their countries, about what it meant to grow old and still not fully understand yourself. He made her laugh. That surprised her most. He was dry, deadpan, and occasionally said things so unexpectedly funny that she had to press her hand over her mouth to keep from waking Chisum's baby. Chisum's baby. That's what she called him at first. The baby, little Emeka, named after his grandfather, 18 months old and already the absolute emperor of that small apartment. Angela had come to Seoul partly for him, this round-faced, serious-eyed boy who grabbed her finger and refused to let go. Emeka was why she stayed. Emeka was also, though she didn't know it yet, why everything was about to get very dangerous. It started with a car parked outside the building. Angela noticed it because she was an early riser, always had been, and she would sit by the window each morning with her tea and watch the street below wake up. The car was black, different from the delivery vehicles and taxis she'd grown familiar with. It sat outside for 3 mornings in a row. She didn't say anything to Chisholm. Chisholm was already stressed. Her husband, Tae Yang, worked long hours and often came home with that tightly wound look of a man carrying something he wouldn't share. He was a good man, Angela had decided, but a private one. On the 4th morning, the car was gone. On the 5th, a man came to the door. Angela was alone with Emeka when the knock came. The man was Korean, mid-30s, expensive jacket, a smile that didn't match his eyes. He spoke in Korean first, then switched to English when he saw her. "Mrs. Okonkwo, I'm looking for Tae Yang. I'm an old friend." "He's not here." "And his wife?" "She's not here either." The smile stayed. "When will they return?" "I don't know." She began to close the door. His foot moved, just slightly, just enough, and her heart kicked hard in her chest. "Tell him," the man said softly, "that Mr. O sends his regards, and that the clock has started." Then he left. That evening, Angela called Junho. She wasn't sure why. She could have called Chisholm. She could have called nobody and convinced herself it was nothing. But something about the man's eyes, cold and precise like a thing that calculates, made her reach for the phone and call the only person in Seoul she felt, in some wordless way, she could trust. She told him everything. The car, the man, the words. The silence on the other end of the line lasted 3 full seconds. "What did you say his name was?" Junho asked. His voice had changed. Not louder, quieter, and somehow that was worse. "Oh, he said to tell Tae Yang that Mr. O sends his regards." Another silence. "Angela." He said her name carefully, the way you handle something fragile. "I need you to do something for me. Tonight. Can you do that?" "What is it?" "Pack a bag. For you and the child. Don't tell Chisholm yet. Just pack." Her stomach dropped. "Junho." "Please," he said. And something about hearing that word from this man, a man she instinctively knew did not say it often, made her stand up immediately. "Okay," she said. "Okay. If this is already pulling you in, hold on, because what comes next is the part that changes everything." Junho arrived within the hour. He came with 2 men she'd never seen, quiet, watchful, moving through the apartment like they were counting exits. Junho himself came straight to her, took her hands briefly, and looked at her face the way a doctor looks for damage. "You're all right," he said, half question, half relief. "I'm all right," she confirmed. "Now explain." So he did. Oh Sung-jin was not an old friend of Tae Yang's. He was a creditor. The kind that didn't exist on paper. The kind that collected debts in ways that banks never would. Tae Yang, Junho had learned in 40 minutes of quiet investigation, had borrowed money 18 months ago, around the time Emeka was born, around the time the medical bills had stacked high and the savings ran low. He had borrowed from people he should never have borrowed from, and the interest had grown into something monstrous. And now they were here. Angela sat through all of this very still. "He came to our door," she said finally, "with my grandson inside." "Yes." "He looked at me like I was furniture." That's how they operate. Pressure the family. Start with fear. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you stop them?" Junho looked at her. His expression was complicated. There was something he wasn't saying, and she could see it sitting behind his eyes, and she filed it away. "Yes," he said. "But Angela, there's something you need to know first." He sat down across from her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely uncertain. Oh Sung-jin works for a man named Beck. And Beck and I... He stopped, started again. "The business I inherited from my father. Some of it was legitimate, and some of it was not. Beck is part of the part that was not. And years ago, when I was trying to extract myself, there were agreements made." His jaw tightened. "Beck left me alone because I left him alone. This changes things. If I step in..." "Will it put you in danger?" she asked. "Possibly." She looked at him for a long time. "Junho, that is my daughter's family. That is my grandson." He held her gaze, and then he nodded